Good morning, everybody. Good morning and welcome. Welcome to Magic in Mind. My name is Maggie Rose Cunningham, and I am here to share with you a session where we're going to be looking at lessons from the Ansuz rune in achieving ecstasy. So I help people who are seeking to develop their spiritual intelligence and their spiritual wisdom. I specialize in trainings and teachings for the Northern European pathway, and the Ansuz rune, which is this rune here, has been speaking to me very strongly over the last few weeks. We've just had the half month of Ansuz, which is when the sun is moving through the sphere of Ansuz, and we also had a new moon in Ansuz. It's very, very present. Odin has been chatting, and he has been sharing wisdom and thoughts on why it is that in the Western world we can really struggle with achieving genuine states of ecstatic trance. If you're joining me here live, share your thoughts as we're going along, and if you're watching the recording, pop your thoughts in the chat box, because this is something that I've been working on for quite a long time, and Odin sort of encapsulated something for me which I really hadn't quite put my finger on at this point. So what we need to do is we're going to start with the etymology of the word ecstasy. So it comes from the Greek, and it means to step outside of yourself, is what it means within the Greek, which I don't know about you, but when I think about this in terms of modern concepts of what being in ecstasy might mean, we might think about that in terms of people who are using drugs, alcohol, hardcore drugs in order to essentially exit the building, which isn't necessarily a positive thing. But this idea of sort of leaving the building is something that I think is important, and it might not necessarily be what the Greeks actually meant. A more positive stance of this would be if we think about it as stepping outside of the ego, which would be a more modern sort of psychological way of looking at this. But it absolutely would work, as an idea that we're stepping outside of the ego. And I think that's what a lot of people, if they're trying to look at this, they're starting out on a spiritual path and they're thinking, okay, I need to achieve ecstasy. I need to have this amazing, joyful, fabulous experience. I'm outside of my ego. It's this sense of what we might think about as being transcendence. Now, I want to put all of that to one side for a moment and say that perhaps it is these things that have led us to a point where we're not really achieving what I think of when I think about ecstatic practice. So if you look at other cultures who haven't lost their ecstatic rituals, ecstatic practice tends to involve working with the body in one way or another. It tends to involve dance or drumming or working with fire or chanting. So it's a very, very embodied experience, which is very difficult to do if you've left the building, because you'll fall over or your rhythm won't work with your drumming or whatever it is. So I was like, it's feeling a bit problematic to me to think about achieving ecstasy in that sense, in the sense of tuning out or disassociating. And I think that this is what has happened for us in the Western world. So this is what Odin came in and he said, have a look at the Ansuz rune. And I often think about the Ansuz rune as about being the sense of the breath, of the inhalation and of the exhalation, and thinking about it as being different forms of magic like seer and galdra, which is the use of the voice and the use of the body within magical practice. But what Odin wanted to bring was a sense of ecstasy and what he referred to as intimacy as being the path that we have lost in the Western world. So he was essentially saying, if we think about ecstatic practice as being the stepping not out but expanding into, which happens when we draw a breath in, I draw it inside myself and then I release it and I expand it and release it back out into the world. He was saying what we don't do in the Western world is we're not comfortable with the everyday reality, which non-ordinary reality, expanded reality, whatever you want to call it, uses as its foundation stone. So he said, don't think about stepping out as being leaving or exiting from, thinking about it as being expanding. So you don't leave one place, you just claim more. So it's an augmented sense of reality. What he was essentially saying is that the challenge that we have got is that we have lost this sense of the path of intimacy. So he was saying, obviously we have this sense of, we might talk about the ego and saying leave the ego behind. We might see the ego as being a bad thing, which it isn't really a bad thing. We all need an ego in order to survive. But it also is, we can't be comfortable with our emotions, for example. Emotions, we need to not show them, we need to repress them, we need to sort of squash them down. There are certain emotions we're allowed to have, there are certain emotions that we're not allowed to have. So we're not really comfortable in our emotional beings. Our physical beings, are flawed and fallible. We're going to grow old, we're going to be too big or too small, we've got a shelf life. We're really taught to be uncomfortable with our bodies, aren't we, in this world? And our own sense of our inner self, our inner space of our thoughts and the way that we receive the world is also something that we've been taught is unreliable. We need to go to school and have an education where we're going to learn how to think properly and what knowledge is accurate and what knowledge is inaccurate. It teaches us to distrust our self, which leads me to then sort of think to myself, okay, so where are we expanding from? Where are we stepping out from? And so Odin was saying that essentially for us, our intimate spaces have become spaces that are deeply uncomfortable at us, where we don't want to be. And so instead of having our intimate space of ourselves, our bodies, our emotions, our thoughts, our spirits, our souls, which we're sort of taught, if we're taught about them at all, we're sort of taught that do they exist, do they not exist? It's doubt, that place of doubt. We're going to want to exit the building, and if we exit the building, we're not having a true ecstatic experience. So if we have an experience where we're not comfortable in the space of the self, and then we're seeking to step outside of the self, it can be very challenging. And I realized that for myself when I started doing embodiment work. So I worked with two amazing teachers called Annie Stoker and Susie Heath, and I went on to train with Susie as an embodiment facilitator. It was because I realized that there was a huge difference between me being in a space where we were doing movement, essentially a sacred movement, and letting my body experience itself and allowing my body to move with the music, and then finding that there was energy around me which then lifted my hands and that I was moving with, and sometimes finding that I was then moving with my ancestors or with spirit, was one experience, which was entirely different from me saying in my mind, oh, this music is an ancestry type music, so I'm going to dance with my ancestors now, and I'm going to think about them being present, and I'm going to imagine that they are here in the space, and I am going to do movements that I think are the right sort of movements to do in an ancestry way. Okay? One of those is me in my body, present with myself, and one of them is me in my mind, and a lot in my ego mind, which we've been talking about, which is a constructed, pretend reality. And the best that I can hope for is that I step out of conscious awareness within that mind space into a little section that's slightly less uncomfortable. Does that resonate with anybody else, that we can be so desperate to leave the space of discomfort that we move into a space where it's almost like a craving for nothing, which is not, I think, what ecstatic practice is about. Ecstatic practice for me is about being fuller. It's being expanded. It's being in a state where we are moving with the energy. We're not thinking about moving with the energy. And this is what Odin was saying. He was saying that in the Western world, it's probably more important to be practicing being comfortable and present in ordinary reality, like the reality of me in my body, tasting food, saying, I don't like this, I do like this, even though I've been programmed, I want this or that, than it is for me to be in non-ordinary, like ecstatic reality, doing the things that we think about when we think about like maybe a shamanic practitioner journeying out into another world, for example, or analysing my dreams, or doing any of those things. Or maybe that's unfair. It's that they are certainly both important, as I think the Ansuz rune tells us. But the practice of being inside our own intimate reality is incredibly important to us. And I wanted to bring in a little exercise for us at this stage, because I recognise when Odin took me on further, he was sort of saying that this sense of uncomfortableness is so debilitating for us then in our ability to be out in the world, present in the world, affecting change, bringing our full magical selves to bear. And I wanted to give you an example of this. You can just look, we can go and we can look on social media, or we can look in the news, and we can see how much suffering there is out there in the world. And there are a number of things that can happen. We can feel entirely overwhelmed by this, by what's happening, and then we can feel helpless. You know, I can't do anything about it. It's too big. It's too big for me to do anything about it, and then I feel helpless. Or I feel like I'm in a privileged position and other people aren't in a privileged position, and I feel bad about that. And our reaction is to disassociate. It's to leave the building. You know, we go into numbness, which is a totally understandable reaction and response to what's happening in the world, because it is really, really big. And we lack the equipment to be able to receive it and process it and do that in-breath and out-breath. You know, this is what I need to receive, this is what I need to let go of, and this is how I can move into action, okay, around this. If we're not able to be comfortable with ourselves, we have nowhere to stand, we have no foundation upon which to take action, and we have no sense of like love for ourselves. Essentially, we get more and more uncomfortable with ourselves and less able to bring our agency into the world. I'm just seeing if I can renew and see what else we've got here. So embodiment work makes me so uncomfortable. I totally resonate with this. Yes, and I think it's really important to recognize that all of these things that I've been talking about, like sitting with our emotions and processing our emotions, or moving into the realm of the subconscious and dealing with the shadow that's, you know, inside there, into our subconscious spaces, or doing like embodiment work, can be incredibly uncomfortable. And they can be uncomfortable because we're taught to be in our minds. You know, they can also be uncomfortable when we actually drop into the space, because we've got quite a lot of stuff to do in there. You know, because we've left it, it's been there for a really long time, and so it's really hard for us to then go through that. So it takes quite a lot of bravery to go into these spaces, and sometimes we don't have that. Sometimes we don't have that ability to drop outside of the mind space. This is why I believe that one of the hardest practices for many people that I work with, and certainly for me, is sitting in silence. It's that experience of transcendence through silence, which often, particularly in sort of the Eastern philosophies, is taught to us. One of the reasons that is so challenging for us is because we're sitting inside the mind space, we're not able to expand into anything else. Our foundation point is that we've vacated the building. So we're trying to be in the building when we're not in it, if that makes sense. You have to get into the building first and then find the space of silence. But we actually become much more present to the fact that I'm not in the building at all. All that exists is my mind chatter for me. And therefore, how can I be in silence? How can I find that silence? So actually, first steps are being in the body. I find it much easier to get into a state of expanded awareness from movement than I do from stillness. The other thing I should mention before we do our practice is the way in which it's not just that the Western world has taught us how to vacate the building, that it's uncomfortable to be in our bodies. It's also taught us that ecstatic practice itself, or ecstatic states, are untrustworthy. No, that we don't want them. They're highly, highly dodgy in like many different ways. So, you know, we're taught that any form of altered state of consciousness is, maybe you might think about it as being like some sort of temporary madness. It's not trustworthy. It's not centered in the rational mind. I was thinking about this and thinking about the way in which rituals and ceremonies have changed, even during the case of, even since Christianization in this country. So things like the Anglicization, is that a word? When we stopped using the Latin in church ceremonies, we gained a huge amount in terms of empowerment, being able to engage with the stories and understand what was happening. But what we lost was an embodied experience of chanting, of making sounds, and of receiving sound without the mind being involved. So it sort of stripped away one of the ways in which the congregation might have entered some form of embodied state without the mind chatter going on. So those sorts of things that allowed us to access a genuine ecstatic state have been stripped out of our rituals over time. And in the other side, we've been more and more exposed to all sorts of different types of drugs, stimulants, television, all those types of things that, used in moderation in very, very different ways in cultures that have an embedded process of ecstatic practice, can be used safely with training and understanding of how it's done. We don't have any of that. We have none of that. And then we're exposed to something that takes us out, that allows us to leave the building, and that's what we do because we don't want to be in the building. It's not, oh, part of me is going to stay and I'm going to expand. It's no, I exit. And that's where addiction comes from. I think there are many, many reasons why it's really difficult for us in the Western world to access a state of what I consider to be true ecstasy, which is where we are experiencing ordinary reality, non-ordinary reality, expanded awareness, an altered state of consciousness, a more attuned sense of beingness at the same time. So we are fuller. We're not empty. We haven't vacated. We're actually more present to more. So I wanted to give you a little exercise to play with, which I find helpful. Some people may not find it helpful because it's important to recognize that each of us has a different experience of discomfort with being present in ourselves. For some people this will work really nicely, and for other people they might say, no, I couldn't. I still felt as if I was in my mind and I felt uncomfortable with myself and I was unable to sort of receive myself fully. So what I'd like you to do is, first of all, just tune into the fact that I think that everybody who, if you've been sitting with me and watching this for any period of time, if you're in the hearth space, you're in one of my channels, and I'm pretty certain that you'd quite like it if there was more peace in the world and more safety and more love and less division and less war, poverty, all of those things. I'm pretty certain that we're all going to agree on that front. So what I would like you to do is to imagine a child, a young child, somewhere in the world right now, who for whatever reason is suffering. They are suffering, and whatever way, wherever they live in the world, that experience is entirely up to you. That piece doesn't matter. I'd just like you to offer to them a space and cup your hands together as if you're creating like a little cradle for that child, and just invite them to sit within your hands. And you might see their hair colour or have a sense of what they're wearing. You might have a sense of what they're experiencing, but I'd like you to keep your focus on them, not on their external experiences. And you're just providing for them a space of loving protection. And if you notice those little things going, oh, but you should be doing more, those distracted voices, that's the mind bit right now, because we're being in the body. So just notice that and give yourself some compassion towards that. Of course I am. Feeling that I'd like to be doing more than holding an imagined child in my hands right now. Just allow that child to be there with you, just as right now you're watching me, whether we're watching this together with maybe like a couple of seconds delay, or whether you're watching this an hour or a day or a week or a month later, we're still having a connection. So we're connecting with the child. And what I'd like you to do is to bring your hands up so that they're just a little bit further, so that you can offer the breath. You remember the Ansuz rune of the breath. So you're going to breathe in, and then as you breathe out, you're going to allow the breath to give to that child what they need. This isn't a conscious, oh, I think this child needs this or that. Allow the breath to give them what they need. And you might experience it as, oh, their belly is full, or they have warm clothes, or they can feel the sun on their back, or they can hear the birds, it's quiet and it's peaceful. And as you do so, the experience of safety gets bigger inside your hands, however that feels to them. That experience of safety and belonging and protection and comfort and love gets bigger. So that each time you breathe, again, it's not a conscious thing, you're just offering to that child what they need, and being a fierce and loving stand for them right now. Breathing in. And offering once more. And as you continue to breathe, I would just like you to bring into your awareness the knowledge that if you did not exist, if your heart wasn't beating, if you weren't breathing right now, you wouldn't be able to offer this, even this tiny space of protection and love. That this space of protection and love and of wishes and desires and hopes and intention wouldn't exist if you weren't offering this right now. And all of the future actions that you might take to make the world slightly better wouldn't exist if you didn't exist right now. Just breathing, allowing your heart to beat and your breath to flow is all that is needed in this one moment. All that is needed is for your hands to be creating this shape and for your intention to be present. And this is the moment of intimacy. The moment of intimacy with you and this wish and these emotions and these intentions. And now I'd like you to connect in with whatever feels right for you in terms of a force outside of yourself that's bigger than you, whether it's a deity or spirit or the ancestors or the universe or the forces of gravity that keep our world spinning or Mother Nature and whatever it is. Feel that opening up to receive this presence, this moment of presence that you have held for yourself and for the child that you're offering this to. And then just going to very gently cup your hands out and then blow this little bubble that you've created. Offer it to the universe. In the northern tradition, we have the great world tree Yggdrasil that holds every moment within it. Its rings are always growing and building. So although we've already now moved on from that particular moment, it's still there, held within the world tree. It's a little magical spell that you've just created and you've held that will be there always. And that is how we move from the intimacy to the ecstasy, and we build that trust and that sense that there is something greater than us, which is what we are connecting with when we're in a space of ecstasy. But we can only do it when we've experienced that place of intimacy before, which is what Odin wanted me to receive and then to share with you through the Ansuz rune, was this sense of the cycle and the flow between the the interior, the experiencing interior expanded self, and the ecstatic, even further expanded space of the all. I'm going to have a little look, see for those who are here with me, any thoughts on this. I'm having to renew it each time and see what was there. So Suzanne, you're saying the Isa I Am practice helps. Absolutely, I think that can really help. And it's that connection with the emotions and the physical body and the mind and the spiritual body that we can receive through the Isa rune, because it's the rune of ice, which is the rune of form, isn't it? So it can be very beautiful for that sense of silence. But it's a little bit like, with rune chanting. We chant and we bring ourselves into the body and we perform that process of movement, and then we receive the silence afterwards, which is again that flow of the Ansuz runes. That's a really, really beautiful example. So thank you, Suzanne. Now, if you want to go deeper with this work, I'll share with you at the end that when I think about the Ansuz rune, I think about two parts of the magical self that I work with, the seer and the mystic. And for me, I make a distinction that works quite well with this topic between the seer and the mystic. And so I see the seer as being the intimate, receiving, experiencing self that is fully present within the body, very much connected to via the Ether rune. In fact, we can use the Ether rune to connect with the seer self so strongly. And then we have the mystic self, which is the part that journeys out and connects with future possibilities and worlds beyond ourselves and brings that back. And if the mystic is just out there and there's no seer, there are no roots. There's no place of homecoming. There's no place from which to turn that intention, that the magical spell that we've just done, into action, to pass it on to our magician and our healer and our sage to actually take that work out into the world. So the inner work involves a deep and profound connection between our seer self and our mystic self, and that continual cycle between connecting to what's possible and to what's out there in the world, and then receiving that back within the seer selves. I believe in the Western world have very much disassociated from our seer selves. In particular, we might look for an experience of a spiritual experience in the realm of the mystic by exiting the building, but without the seer we never get to receive that. We never actually get to experience true transformation, because that has to happen inside, and that's in the realm of the seer. So if that's something that interests you, you can go to my website, look at my magical self resources. I have retreats to reclaim the power for each of the 5 parts of the magical self. We're working on the healer at the end of September, and then the seer will be the next retreat coming, so you can absolutely, the waiting lists are open for those. You can absolutely look at joining those, and let me know your thoughts on the idea that achieving ecstasy first means achieving intimacy with ourselves. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much to those of you who were able to join me live today. Much appreciated. I'm sorry that I couldn't see all of your comments direct on the screen, but I hope I managed to respond to most of them from looking on my phone. It's lovely to see all of you, and I look forward to seeing you all again very soon.